In 1891, a seed company representative visiting farms in rural Kentucky found something that made him stop his survey entirely. Every farm in a three-county area was growing the same 11 varieties of vegetable. Not similar varieties, the same ones, identical. And not one farmer in that entire region had purchased a single seed in over 40 years. He assumed, at first, that they were isolated, cut off, that the region was simply behind. It wasn't. These farmers traded with neighbouring counties. They read almanacs. They subscribed to agricultural journals. One of them had a son studying at a state college. They knew the commercial seed catalogues existed. They had seen the advertisements, and they had decided, collectively and without apparent coordination, not to use them. The representative wrote in his field notes, not his official report, his personal notes, that he had never encountered a farming community with lower input costs and higher yield consistency. He didn't know how to explain it. He moved on to the next county and kept the thought to himself. That detail matters. Remember it. But here is what he could not explain. These farmers were not producing inferior results. They were not producing average results. The varieties they were growing performed differently than anything available in the commercial catalogues of 1891. More reliably, more consistently. In conditions that should have produced partial crop failures, drought years, late frosts, early wet seasons, these 11 varieties held. A botanist would later describe the behaviour as adaptive in ways that current agricultural science had no framework to account for. The seeds were doing something that seeds, according to what was understood in 1891, were not supposed to be able to do. How? The farmers saved them. Specifically, carefully over generations, using a selection method so precise that it looked to outsiders like nothing at all. They were not just saving seeds, they were training them. And that only explains what the seeds could do. It does not explain why, when a university botanist attempted to study and document this system formally in 1896, his research was redirected within 6 months. Not cancelled, redirected to a project that had nothing to do with seed preservation. He never returned to it. His notes from those 6 months have never been located. The method itself was not complicated. That is the first thing that has to be understood. Every fall, before the harvest was complete, each family walked their rows and selected. Not the biggest vegetables, not the most uniform. The ones that had survived the hardest conditions that season. If July had been dry, they selected the plants that held through dry July. If there had been a late blight, they selected from the edge of where the blight stopped. Year after year after year, the seed stock was shaped by pressure, stressed deliberately. The varieties that came out the other side of 40 years of that process were not the same plants that went in. If you're standing in a garden centre right now, this spring, holding a seed packet, look at the germination rate printed on the back. It tells you what the seed does in ideal conditions. That number says nothing about what the seed does when conditions are not ideal. That was not a problem the Kentucky farmers had. The selection process also included something that no agricultural institution of the period had formalized. Trading, but not random trading. Specific, intentional exchange between families, not to introduce new varieties, but to prevent weakness. A family that had grown the same bean strain for 3 decades would exchange seed stock with a family 8 miles away. Same variety, different pressure history. The resulting combination was stronger than either line alone. They did not have a word for what they were doing. They did not need one. It worked. Stop. Everything you have been told about seeds assumes that better varieties come from outside, from companies, from catalogues, from institutions. That assumption was not always there. It was built, carefully, over about 30 years. And the people who built it had a reason that had nothing to do with better harvests. Between 1890 and 1930, the commercial seed industry in the United States expanded from a regional trade into a national market worth hundreds of millions of dollars annually. That expansion required one thing above everything else: farmers who did not save their own seeds. A farmer who saves seeds does not buy seeds. That arithmetic is simple. What is less simple is how completely, in the space of one generation, a practice that had sustained American farming for 200 years was made to feel unnecessary. Not illegal, not impossible, just unnecessary. And things that feel unnecessary get forgotten. The campaigns were not hidden. They were published in the very almanacs these farmers read. Articles appeared regularly through the 1900s and 1910s explaining that home seed saving produced inferior stock, that disease spread through saved seeds, that modern varieties from professional breeders outperformed anything a farmer could select himself. Some of those claims had partial basis. Many did not. But they were repeated consistently enough and by enough authoritative voices that within a generation the questions stopped being asked. By 1930, the majority of American farmers were purchasing seeds annually. By 1950, most had forgotten their families ever did anything different. Now, go back to the field notes, the personal ones, not the report. The representative wrote that the yield consistency in those Kentucky farms was unlike anything he had encountered. He had been doing survey work for 11 years. He had visited farms across 7 states. He used the word unlike once in 11 years of notes. That note was written in the fall of 1891. The following spring, 1892, something else happened. Which brings us back to where this began. The representative filed his official report. It was thorough. It documented every variety, every family, every yield record he could obtain. The report was received by his company's head office in the spring of 1892. It was never published. A summary was circulated internally, 1 paragraph, that described the Kentucky farming community as operating on outdated methods with no commercial relevance. 1 sentence in the original full report was removed from that summary. The representative noticed. He wrote to his supervisor asking why it was removed. His supervisor did not answer the question. He answered a different one. The removed sentence described something one elderly farmer told the representative on the last day of his survey. Something about where the original 11 seed varieties had come from. Not Kentucky. The farmer named a source, a specific name that pointed further back, further west. A community or a place or a person. The grammar of the sentence makes it difficult to determine which that had passed the 11 varieties east sometime before the Civil War. That name does not appear in any seed catalogue, any botanical record, or any agricultural document from that period. The seeds themselves, or varieties descended from them, were still being grown in that region as late as the 1940s, according to one county extension record that mentions them without explanation, almost as an aside, before moving on to discuss recommended commercial varieties for the following season. After that, nothing. The report ends. The seeds are still growing somewhere. Whether the varieties survived what came after is not recorded. The archive does not know, but it has not stopped looking.